Hello and welcome to another episode of the Revenue Revolution podcast brought to you by Jointflows. Today, we're joined by the legend himself, Chris Ritson. And Chris Ritson is the founder of Chris Ritson, as well as the founder of the SDR Leadership Coach as well. And that wasn't me making fun of him. That's the name of his company, but it is logical as to why he's landed on that name as well. But I'll let Chris explain that himself. Welcome to the show. How are you, Chris?
Thanks, folks. Yeah, I'm good. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. It still feels weird introducing my business's name as my own name. But because I write a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, that's all people know me for. So
Yeah.
yeah, I just thought keep it simple,
Makes
basically.
sense. And for our listeners out there, if you don't follow Chris on LinkedIn, you should because he's adding a lot of value every day through his LinkedIn posts as well. But we always like to start off with a little bit of a backstory, Chris, so our listeners know who you are. I'm sure there's not many people who don't know who you are by this point, but for those that don't know you, bring us up to speed. Who is Chris and how have you got to where you've got to?
I'm sure there's lots of people who definitely don't know who I am, but me. 10 years plus in SaaS sales, started as an SDR, became an AE, decided that I wanted to go down the route of leadership, managed three global SDR teams and an AE team. Was super lucky to be at three different businesses that all ended up exiting. I met again like some amazing people along the way. Like I was a tiny part of those things, but I'm proud to shout about them, right? But yeah, as part of that, amazing people along the way who just introduced me to more amazing people, and I think that network effect is so valuable for anyone. But I was very much part of the businesses where I was lucky. It was 99% luck, 1% judgment, right? That's what I always say to people. I wasn't 23 and I had this master plan of working at three businesses that exited. I didn't even know what an exit was at the time. I just got paid out on my shares once and thought, oh, this is amazing. I would love to find another one of these.
The dream.
And then I accidentally did. Again, it was an accident though. Like I was, just like the companies that I interviewed at, followed my heart on which ones I thought had the best leaders that would be able to propel me forwards in my careers or in my career and really the kind of the rest went from there. I got to the point a couple of years ago though where I'd done that journey three times and I wanted to do my own thing. I was, hands in the air. I was never amazing at having a boss. That was always something that I was very open about with my own bosses. Um, and sometimes I could be difficult. Like I could be difficult to work with if I really believed in something, needed to be the other go in the other direction, etc. So I went off and did my own thing, which was started building the first company that you mentioned, so the ChrisRitson.xyz, which is a training company for SDRs. And then my friend asked me if I wanted to build another company. So I was like, yeah, like, companies, they you don't need to put much effort into those. Obviously, I was super wrong. So I now have two companies. But the other one is primarily for SDR leaders. Because I've been both SDR and SDR leader, seen the pain of both of those things, and kind of feel like I've found so like my dharma, should we say, with those things that I just care about that space. People always thought I was kind of crazy for not doing AE and AE leadership because there's more money there, you get to work with more senior people. My thing was always like, well, I just enjoy it's not that I don't enjoy it and I don't like AEs, I just enjoy it slightly less. So I followed that and I'm kind of glad that I did, to be honest.
Yeah. Thank you for being here, Chris. You're known to be one of the top talents in SDR leadership. And I'm really happy that you're on my cap table as well. So just for transparency here, the
Our,
yeah,
our
our cap
table.
table. It's a small table, but it's a very
Innocent
welcoming.
bystander over here.
Yeah, we're having a lot of fun around the table. So the question I have for you is, I think the SDR world is very competitive, obviously, and I would say that's probably the hardest part of the business, and that's what makes or break. essentially businesses. If you don't have pipeline, there's no one to convert at all. And you have to have pipeline to have clients. You have to have clients to then retain the clients and then upsell and cross-sell. So everything starts with creating that pipeline. And it's also, I think, the sector where there's the most competition against technology and noise. Like, what's your take on AI, SDR, like where the market is going and all of that?
Um, I think the market has evolved pretty rapidly over the last couple of years with regards to AI, right? I think the market at a high level is, and I think the SDR role, and I think the SDR industry is ripe to be disrupted by some new technology. Um, but I think that there's a slight jump of the gun, right? And this is very normal for humans to do this. All right, but there's a slight jump of the gun of like it's going to completely remove any need for an SDR, and we need to remove them from the entire process, right? We've gone kind of from 0 to 100 here, where if we think about 10 years ago, we were saying everyone was saying the same thing. It just the technology was different. We're talking about automation. So we're talking about companies like SalesLoft, Outreach. What did we do? Well, we gave that technology to salespeople slash humans. They then abused it because they were told to go and get more, 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 more. So they did try to get more, 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 push the buyer away, which is the person in this process that we never really think about, and then wonder why, we've gone full circle and that we need a new technology like AI to basically save us from all the mistakes that we've made with automation. And if you go back 20 years ago, we said something is similar again, right? We said DG and demand gen was going to replace salespeople as a whole.
Mm.
Everything will now be inbound, right? And then everything went inbound. It didn't, but things went inbound or started to go inbound and it became a thing, PPC, etc. And then because we tried to get more, more, more and monopolize the markets that we were in, etc., we ended up butchering them, pushing the users away and the buyers away. Prices shot through the roof, and we needed a new technology to replace it. So automation came in. So like all I'm trying to say is people obviously, they come up with innovative ideas and then they want to sell their stuff. And AI is just for me is the innovative idea, and there's lots of people that wants to sell their stuff. And as soon as November 22 was it came around when ChatGPT hit the market, it was funny that everyone changed their email addresses from .com to .ai, right?
Mm.
But if we remember, like 5 years ago, everyone changed them to .io. So
Very true. Very
like,
true.
not that like it's not that innovative. It's a different, but it's a different. It's just that a different form of technology. When it comes to AI, I just think that people need to remember that rather than just believing and talking solely about the future, which is what we are so obsessed with doing because humans naturally always want a better future than is their current state, right? We've got to remember the past as well, because the past is the best indicator of the future. That's my view, or that's my logic around where I think AI is going to go, is I think AI is an incredible enabler of the sales industry and can be a brilliant addition to an SDR's day to day to remove repetitive tasks, etc. But it's got to be like controlled to a certain level as well. Otherwise, we're just going to do what we've done to everything in the world as humans, right? We've abused them. It's the same with everything, like fossil fuels, whatever. It's all comes down to how do we how do we get something as quickly as is humanly possible? I don't think AI is any different necessarily to that. So, and I think the technology is obviously still relatively new, right? So whilst there's been lots of good strides, there's still a long way to go. Um, and I struggle to see all buyers wanting to speak to robots to do business. I'm not saying that some buyers won't. I do think that, but if you actually look at buyers in the market, you've got three generations now who are buying: boomers, millennials, Gen Zs. They're all like now buyers. Gen Zs are more open to that, but they're not, you know, the majority of the current market. And that's what I'd encourage, people to really, really think about as well is who is your buyer rather than what is your revenue goal? Who is the buyer and how do you interact with them and how do you convince them and how do you build a relationship with them over a long period of time? And can AI do that? That's the question we should be asking rather than can AI make my optics look better right now? But I just think that's the first question, and then in turn the optics will look better.
Yeah, I love that answer. I agree with you on a lot of that. I think that advances in technologies are often enablers to create more efficiencies in the way people do things, and very rarely does it completely rip and replace the current way of doing things or the people who are doing those jobs. What I struggle to see, however, may in particular when it comes to SDR functionality,
Yeah.
is maybe it's because of all of these AI SDRs at the moment, and they're everywhere, and people's emails are getting swamped, and that notion of personalization really just is the same across all of these technologies now. How do you incorporate AI to create those efficiencies for an SDR? Like, what role does that play within there?
I think you start with the least valuable tasks, right? And you work your way upwards from there. Or the most repetitive tasks that SDRs are running. But I think there's a balance between. I think this is what people have got to understand the difference between. Is like there's repetition and then there's value. Like you can call someone 100 times. If you get through to two people and book two meetings, that is repetitive but valuable, right? Like, and I know everyone wants to call 100 people and book 100 meetings, right? And that would potentially be useful. Still, like, yet to see it because ultimately it's the person on the other side is not necessarily picking up. So, like, I think my view is that with rip and replace, it's a pretty extreme move, right? Where like you're essentially saying something is extinct overnight. It's almost like Big Bang Theory, right? Cool, like this happens and then the dinosaurs are just gone overnight. Well,
Mhm.
I don't think SDRs are dinosaurs. I just think that they can evolve and improve, right? And I think that AI is going to be able to help them do that by making them more effective, making them more efficient. Um, that's what I would, and that's what I think people need to think about. And I think if people also need to consider like why have we got to this point where we're, downsizing SDR teams? Well, I would strongly argue that the real reason is not because the SDR is inefficient, is through their own doing. I would argue that it is the companies that have hired them have not looked at their TAM effectively. They have inflated their TAMs to get investment,
Mhm.
right? And then those investors have given them way too much money and they've not been able to pay it back. But and then they've gone and hired loads of people that are really, really expensive. So, like, is that an SDR's fault for being in that position, or is that a company's fault for overhiring and overinflating their valuation? Like, obviously, the company's never going to admit that that's what they did, right? It's just going to be a restructure. But that's me calling it out because I've seen it like 50 times in the last 100 times in the last year or two.
Yeah.
So that I think is the bigger picture that people should definitely be also considering, or like the counter, like devil's advocate argument to all of this, as opposed to what we see all the time, right? SDRs suck, SDRs are rubbish, SDRs can't do this, they don't have a clue what's going on. Well, it's like, well, they're 21, 22 sometimes. They've never had a job before. When I first went to school, my first year, I didn't know what school was. I didn't know how I needed to behave or what I needed to do. It's kind of a similar
Mm.
sort of thing, right? So yeah, that'll be my like counter argument to it. Uh, and I think things will be slower than necessarily again that we are trying to force it to to happen where it's like an overnight thing. But we also got to remember, right, that like the more extreme an opinion is, the more attention that opinion gets. So if you're saying it's dead, remove it, that's an extreme opinion. So you're not going to get much from sitting on the fence on it.
Yeah.
I agree. I think the risk is not about the AI. I think there's bad behavior, as you were pointing out, Chris, around burning channels, and I've seen some of these technology which are volume based, and the whole uh, approach is that repetitiveness of activity turned that to the highest heat, and that creates a direct consequence, I think. And you're getting caught later on by Google putting more constraints around tracking and sort of that, so that there's rigor in managing that is coming up as a sanction almost. Um,
There
but I
has to
agree.
be.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I think that there has to be these sort of
Yeah,
things from a Google perspective, right? And if you go back to like the fundamentals, when you 10 years ago when I started in SaaS, I looked at the market and we had like one competitor that was like 20 years old and they were pen and paper process. And we just said, hey, click these three buttons and voila. So everyone that we called was like, that's amazing. It was this like greenfield site, right, of just being able to disrupt something really easily, which meant that obviously if it's a greenfield site, it's just then a rush to getting as much of that market as possible, which is perfect for AEs and SDRs because you play the volume play and there's lots of people in the fish pond, so to speak.
yeah.
Whereas now you've got less people in the fish pond, but you've got like 30 times the vendors that are going after the same
Fishing line.
accounts,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And the salespeople, sorry, they're thinking, well, how can I get their attention? Well, I've never been trained how to actually send a good message, so I'm going to have to go for volume. And they go for volume.
Yeah,
And then when they don't get anything back, what do? Well, we freak out. So we go for more volume. And it compounds. So, but with like fundamentally, like we find ourselves in such a different like space now within the market. Is like everyone in every department has SaaS solutions. 10 years ago, very
yeah,
few people had, and very few departments had SaaS solutions. So we're not trying to like upgrade or digitalize these businesses. We're trying to displace something that's in place right now that is, in most cases anyway, that is maybe slightly worse, right? It's not the difference between pen and paper and like digitalization. It's like, slightly older technology, slightly newer technology. That's
yeah,
much harder for a salesperson to go in and convince. You have to
Yeah.
send much better messages, much more often, for longer to to sell over these periods of time. But unfortunately, that's just led to companies still applying the same approach of like land grab, um, which has then driven volume into the play and pushed the buyers and go back to your point of burning markets. But that's the actual like kind
yeah.
of like domino that's happened.
Yeah, I like to see. I've never thought about this like this. I always thought about this as there's an innovation cycle, and this innovation cycle is getting shorter and shorter. So next 4 weeks going to be AI SDR. Next 4 week after that is going to be at, I don't know, some bot GT ChatGPT bot who's going to make cold calls like that.
AI CEOs next, man.
Yeah, yeah. Like, please come quicker.
AI founders, come on. Right. There actually, and this is a total side note, but there is actually like AI, there are AI coaches where like I can actually replicate myself, basically. It is probably, this is why I am also a fan of AI. It is the second best solution to me scaling myself and my knowledge, but it is not to the same level. So, like, whilst there is an argument to have AI in there, right, you got to appreciate that it's probably at a level where it's going to be maybe 50, 60%
Mm,
like the skill level, capacity, etc. of what you could or a human could produce. I'm sure that gap will close over time. It's like when you hire anyone into your teams, right? You know that they can't quite do as they're 80% capacity of what you could do. But you can't
Mm.
really be annoyed at them because they're not you. But you are a little bit. You're like, oh, I wish you could do it like me. But you
mm.
can't scale yourself, so you have to accept that. it's the same with AI, I think, in as a concept, is that you've got to accept at the current point, if you want to employ that route, then it isn't going to be quite as good as you or exactly what you want. But obviously you can improve it, program it, and all that sort of stuff over periods of time. But it's a more like, it depends what you believe. Is it second or third best solution to duplicating yourself?
Yeah.
What's
I
what's the
think
hard?
you mentioned when people turn up the dial and they put lots of volume activity in, they don't get any results. So what they do, they throw more oil on the fire, as it were, or fuel on the fire even, and it gets worse and worse. And you said they don't know how to cut through the noise. And I don't believe there's been a harder time to cut through the noise than now. If I look at my inbox, it's rammed with messages I have no intention of reading, right? And they go into my spam filter. Same within my LinkedIn as well. And so for us as a company, we're very much dial first, right? Like the vast majority of our outbound meetings that we generate are
Yeah.
through the telephone for that pure reason as well. Like I don't feel like for ourselves, for our size as a team, it's very difficult to justify the effort we put into that activity versus the results that we get. And we get good results from the phone. How do you cut through the noise? Because, everybody wants to be multi-channel. You want to have all these different touch points and you want all your channels working for you and you want to activate as much as you can. But how do you get email to work for you and cut through that noise? Because at the moment, it's very difficult for someone to get to me through email. But if you phone me and I pick up, you increase your probability of getting a meeting significantly.
I think it's case by case, right? So like when I'm consulting companies on this, everyone always says the same thing, which is like we want to be multi-channel, etc. And I'm like, that's cool that you want to be multi-channel, but can your team perform multi-channel? And are they ready to do it? And are they all in the team really, really good at those, let's say three channels, LinkedIn, phone, and email? Because if they're not, stop being multi-channel, go and play to each rep's strength. Um, so this is something that I did about 6, 7 years ago with my SDR team, and it went really, really well. But this was an example, when I pushed back internally to my boss, he hated the idea when I first introduced it to him. I said, I'm not going to set the team. He wanted 100 calls a day, and I said, I'm not going to give them 100 calls a day as a set metric. And here's the reason why. The reason why is because is basically because out of this team of 20, I've got 8 reps that are great on the phone. Now, 6 reps good on LinkedIn, and 6 reps that are good on email, something like that. Or that's their number one channels. I want them to play to their strengths as much of the 8 hours they are in this office as possible. But if I say to them, you almost make 100 calls today, and I've got 8 reps that are going to thrive off it, I've got 60% or whatever that is of my team that is not going to do well or as well as they could. Overall, that's going to impact our number. It's going to impact the A's number and slide all the way down the chain. So instead, I suggest we do 100 core or key activities per day. And my direction for them will be that I want them to employ like 70/30, 80/20, whatever, of playing to your strength. And in the training room, we'll work on your weaknesses. And that's what the reps did. And the reps were happier. The reps felt more confident going into each day. The rules, we had a couple of rules around it, like, cool, if we can't get a phone number, yeah, of course it's top prospect. So we email, right? Or we LinkedIn. Or if you can't get their email, then we call, right? Those sort of things. But it was the reps just understanding that what we cared more about was that they would be able to play in the positions that they were best, right? And I always think about this as like a sports team, right? If I've got 11 people in a football team, not all of them should be treated like goalkeepers, right? With the same rules, because that's not how football works. If you're a striker, go and play up front. If you're great at defending, play at the back. If you're a goalkeeper, play in goal,
Yeah.
right? So that's how I used to think about the team. And yes, that makes it slightly harder to manage, like operationally, right? It makes the dashboards a little bit more annoying, etc. But you've got a happier team and you've got a team of reps that are maximizing their potential, more likely to maximize their potential more, based on what their like core strengths are right now. And then we would absolutely go and work on the weaknesses in the training room, right? Where we come in and be like, look, email isn't there yet. We need to get to this level. Here's the plan of how we're going to go about doing that, rather than spending all of our one-to-ones just saying, you need to make more calls. Why are you not making more calls? Because I've been sending emails because I get all my meetings from email. Make more calls though. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Chris, there's a reason
So
why you're the best. I
There's a
really
reason
like this
for it. Eh?
approach. Yeah, it's there's a meme and there's like different animals and they're like, oh, you can't judge all the animals by their ability to climb the tree, and you've got a fish and you've got a monkey and a giraffe or
yeah,
what.
yeah. You honestly, it's like someone once said to me, "Is like, Chris, like your job, if you want to go in leadership, your job is to maximize, to help each person in your team reach their full potential,
Yeah.
right?" Obviously, I took that very seriously and wanted that to be like full potential every week. Right? Maximize the meetings, guys. But
Yeah.
that was the only way, or the best way that I've, found people were kind of, actually receptive to it. And it also created a really diverse team in terms of their opinions. So whilst I'm a fan of like phone first. I think it's also about it's less about a blanket rule, and it's more which makes these rules do make us feel more comfortable, folks, of course, but it's more about like the individual in front of us and how what they're going to be like the best at. But you got to also take some things with a bit of a pinch of salt as a leader along the way, because like 90% of the new reps that start will always be kind of crapping themselves about the phone, and they'll be like, I'm definitely great on email. I'm like, first 3 months we will find out,
Yeah.
right? I'm confident you're a better verbal communicator than you are a written communicator. That's what I'm going to judge you on. Remember, the goal is to maximize your potential and get the best results you can, not what makes you the most comfortable, right? Because everyone's more comfortable on email than they are on the phone, especially to start anyway.
All right. So Mick just decided then I'll stay on the phones. You go on email?
But it's not even my first language, so I think all my channels are broken.
That was honestly one of the secret sources. Not just for the reps, like, and hitting the numbers that I used to get quoted on, right, were obviously total pipeline number, total ops numbers, and pipeline to close, or like accepted to close, like that rate of what we produce in our team. We wanted to get between 25 and 30% of those opportunities from SDR close, as they ended up as closed one. That was a really, really important number for us because it just tied me really closely to the AE function, but in a positive way. But like the other thing was is like, board level, you got investors, they're always going to say things like you need 75%, 80% of your team on quota. Um, if 60% of my team, this was my argument, genuinely, I said this pretty much word for word. If 60% of my team are not playing to their strength, they're playing out of position, how can we be confident to say that we're going to have 75, 80% of the team on number this year?
Yeah.
Right? Like we've got to think about if let's not wait till the end of the year and say, oh, well, classic 20% of the team have hit quota and that they've pulled everyone else up, and there's so much pressure on them that we've got to go and pay them loads to keep them, and we're freaking out if they ever hand their notice in. It's like, let's try not to have that situation before it happens. So that they were the sort of things that we like really thought about, like really cared about. We're slightly innovative around as well, right? In the way that we thought about SDRs, and that goes back to this AI piece as well, right? Is I'll gamble that most SDRs out there are not playing to their strengths most of the day,
Mm.
right? You got the facts like an SDR spends 28% of their time selling. Okay, well, better question is how much of that 28% are they playing to their top channel, their top strength,
Yeah.
Probably very little for lots of them,
Yeah.
right? But there's got to be efficiency gains just straight away there. And I think that's where like a lot of my like consulting customers, like we just come in and change a couple of really simple things around that, and that thought process, and they start to see better results, happier people. And the long-term benefit is what, Peakon testing, etc., saw, which was hugely impactful for the longevity of the business and the success of the business is their SDRs became AEs. Those SDRs who became AEs became leaders or enterprise AEs. They've stayed 5, 6, 7 years. When you've got a
Mm.
cycle of people in businesses
Yeah.
2 years, you're
Yeah.
selling, complex solutions. You buy someone 6 months in, they hit the first deal. Within 18 months, they're gone. That's painful. So like we just like really wanted that. You see like companies like Cognizant, right, as an example,
Yeah.
they did that pretty well as well with like, like Dave, etc. A lot of their reps who are AEs now closing 6, 7 figure deals they were started as SDRs. It's slower, it's more painful, it's more investment up front, but longer term, it keeps the culture and the core of the team together.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. There's a couple of topics you kind of goes back to every now and then. One is about kind of leadership quality, and then the second is about that hype around the VC model, where you kind of inflate the numbers and then you cascade down, so that someone has to catch up. Like there's gonna be a lag, and then the way I see it is the more you inflate the number at the top, the bigger the repercussion at the bottom. Like it's almost a direct one-to-one relation. And on the Jointflows side, like we don't do much pre pipeline. We do post pipeline, post discovery basically. But I see some shocking behavior on deal management, sales methodology adoption, and all of that, where you're like, well, that's not the reps. That's on you as a sales leader to be essentially better at what you're doing. Like, do you feel like there's a lingering problem on we just don't have the right leaders in place to create that culture of performance?
I think 100%, right? Where like, I can specifically talk to the SDR leadership side of things a lot, right? Where I think it definitely exists in AE, but if you look at the profile of a typical SDR leader, this is why my business or one of my businesses exists, is the typical profile of an SDR leader is a first-time manager who isn't really taken as seriously at the commercial leadership table, right? Um, and what does that kind of result in? Well, that results in the person who's looking after your entire outbound pipeline channel, right? And therefore, whatever revenue, percentage you've associated to that, right? Let's say 50% outbound that they're responsible for, you're putting that in the hands of someone who has never done any leadership before, and then you're telling them to double it and to quadruple the size of the team. They've never hired anyone before. They've never performance managed anyone before. They've never had to manage up before, apart from to their own SDR manager, who also didn't know how to manage, right? Because they were the same profile. So, like, whilst I know you've got to start somewhere in leadership, it's got to be like what's happened is when companies were scaling so much over the last like 2, 3, 4 years, um, the profile of, especially in SDR leadership, the profile of the leaders, there was no experienced leaders on the market, right? It was a great thing for me at one point because as an experienced leader, I could literally pretty much demand what I wanted from a salary perspective because there were no other people. So it was almost like this gold dust kind of scenario just for experience. And a lot of other people did that as well who had previous experience. But that left this huge group of individuals who'd never done any leadership before, that businesses were putting, huge sums of pipeline and therefore potential revenue in the hands of. And businesses never, I don't think they think about it as much as they don't put as much consideration around that as they necessarily need to. Because all that happens is then the SDR leader doesn't hit number because the SDRs don't hit number because they can't hire properly, because they can't coach properly. And then that's 50% of your pipeline. So then what does the CEO think? Well, I need to put more pressure on marketing because otherwise we're not going to hit the top number, or the CRO thing, right? And then it kind of just like becomes like a pressure cooker almost just from that one piece there. So my thing for people as like a solution is if they are going to go for that profile, they have to think about, the whole narrative around you get what you pay for. You're not going to get 30 million in pipeline, or the chances are slim that you get 30 million pipeline this year from two SDRs and an SDR leader who's never done it before, right? But you might from 10 SDRs and an SDR leader who has done it before, kind of, that sort of mentality. So drop the number of expectation from your SDR function if you're going to go junior, give them a fighting chance, and reload that elsewhere, or reload the whole model, or rethink the whole model a little bit. But yeah, there's just too much put on that side is my experience. I experienced that as well, right? Where even as my first management role was actually AE, because at the time it was 8-9 years ago, SDR didn't really exist, so it's 360. What they wanted from me was they wanted the new business team to close 1 million in new business a month. I was like 24. And I could barely put that number on a spreadsheet, right? They set you up for failure quite early. And bear in mind, I was getting paid 32K a year to be like head of AE. Obviously, that's a massively inflated title for what I was actually doing, but I was nowhere near ready for that. I think it's the same thing for a lot of SDR leaders.
I think a lot of what you talk about, well, not a lot of it, but some of what you talk about on LinkedIn is when SDRs progress into different roles, SDR to AE and so forth, and how there's a failure rate between making that jump versus the amount of time or tenure that you have within your original SDR job. Speak a little bit about this as well, and where do you think the gaps are for these SDRs who are making those leaps, and why do they exist?
I think everyone is fed by society that status and more money is the most important thing. And then they forget that they need the skills to go and be able to be successful in these roles. A lot of those skills are just learned from experience, failure, and messing up, but keeping on going because you've got enough passion for the role to stay in the game. If you're an SDR and you've only got 5 months experience and you're getting offered an AE role, obviously most people aren't going to turn that down, right? Of course they're not, but that's not a failure on the SDR. That's a failure on the leader for offering it in the first place. But this is, we saw so much of that recently because people are like, oh, well, where are my AEs coming from? Right, well, I need to just rush someone through. And all you're doing there, if you go back to the sports analogy, is you're just putting more and more and more junior people into your first team, right? How many, 14, 15-year-olds can go and handle the pressure of playing in front of a 90,000 person crowd? Well, not that many. And they've played football for probably 12 years. How many 21, 22-year-olds are going to handle the pressure of closing 500K in revenue this year when they've only had a job for 5 months? Probably not many. Right. So I think it's more about SDR leaders rather than them feeding the narrative of like, I'll get you promoted as quick as possible. It's my job is not to get you promoted. My job is to get you to be successful in whatever your next role is, right? Once you've been in the game for 3 to 6 months. And that's what we used to measure people on in my leadership team would be, I don't care about the number of people you have promoted. I care about the percentage of people that ramp up effectively into their new role. That's what I'm going to judge you on as a leader. And that's what we did judge them on, right? We celebrated the promotions, but then we re-celebrated the ramp up for the leader afterwards. That was them doing a good job.
Yeah, I was part of a company, and I've got experience on that sports side as well, where I can relate. It would be the same competition, but you're now in the world scene, and then you just fail for the first 2 years because you just can't handle the pressure. And one of the companies that joined, they had for SDRs, they had I think it's called Agoji, an Agoji team. So first 3, 4 months, 6 months, no target. You're just learning the job. You're hired from a university. You've never done it. And it was recognized, right? So they had that playground, managed playground, where they didn't have a hard target or very small and then building up.
Yeah,
company started to do really bad. They started to hit, bad performance metrics. So the Agogy team,
yeah,
all right, no more ramp up. We're going full target straight away.
yeah. It's honestly it's mad. It's mad that like sort of used to be the case, right? And my like I guess baptism of fire into sales was a group of 9 people. Here's the phone, go.
Yeah.
9 months in, I was the only person left. Like, because my manager was like, you either like it or you don't. Or basically, we said other things, but it was like it or you get out. And that was literally it. I think I stayed in the game genuinely because of my ego at the time, where I'd basically told my parents that I'd got this amazing job in London. And it definitely wasn't amazing. I hated my life, right? But I couldn't turn around to them and be like, oh, I've quit now, because I'd never really quit anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like it was 100% an ego thing that kept me in that job at the time. I needed it because it then got me into an AE role and stuff like that. But I mean, I got in an AE role, and this is what I always say to people as well, is I got an AE role simply because I outlasted everyone else, not because I was the most talented in the group. I just out
Yeah.
survived them. And I think a lot of SDR can be that way as well. A lot of sales is just out survive.
Yeah.
It's true.
Stay in the game for longer than anyone else, and you'll probably be more successful than 99.9% of people.
Yeah,
Excellent.
that's very true.
Chris, I really appreciate you jumping on. It's been one of the more informative sessions that we've had. We do have a traditional wrap-up question that we ask all of our
Go for
guests,
it.
which is, for your whole career to date, what is your favorite memory and why?
Oh, a difficult one to that is a difficult one to answer. But I would say the first thing that comes to mind is closing my first deal as an AE, because I was on a PIP,
Oh yeah.
and I literally had like a week to close this deal, otherwise they were just going to end my probation period. And we're on the Friday, um, and I closed a £324 deal. And my CEO turned to me and he was just like, "That is going to lose us money." And I said, "Well, it gives me another month in the game." And he wasn't particularly keen with my response, but yeah. But the point being is, it just like kept me in the game again. All right, I would have lost that role. That was at Perkbox. That I went on at Perkbox. I didn't miss a number as an AE after that, apart from once, and then got promoted and went into leadership, and that kind of started my leadership journey, and met quite a lot of friends that I have now there, and stuff like that. So if I hadn't have closed that, the rest of it just wouldn't have been possible, to be honest with you.
See, just reiterates what you said before. You just have to survive.
Just have to survive. Sometimes, yeah, you just have to you just got to find a way. Like there is always a way. If you stare at the wall long enough and hard enough, you will come up with a way of figuring something out. It's just really painful and boring sometimes to do that.
There you go. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us again. This has been the
Yeah, no
Revenue.
worries, folks. Thanks very much for having
Awesome.
me.
It's been a Revenue Revolution podcast. Until next time. Bye bye.
Bye
See you later,
bye.
guys.